Everybody, how's it going? Andrew here. And I just wanted to say real quick, if you could do me a huge favor and all of us here on the Indie Game Movement podcast, and that is just to write a review or rate the show. One of the two, whatever works for you. It would mean the world to us. That information, the review, the feedback, so helpful to know if we're on the right track, if we're doing things that you really like about this show, if we're covering the right content, the right guests, whatever it may be, all that's helpful. Not only that, the reviews, the ratings, those are all helpful in terms of discoverability so we can do better on the platforms that we're on, wherever you're listening. If you could just take a moment, write a review, it would absolutely mean the world to us, and just a small little way that you can help and do your part as a listener to make sure other people are finding out about the podcast, are learning and getting the great, helpful content that you are also receiving just by listening. So again, take a moment whenever you can, write a review, rate the show. It would mean the world to us. So thank you so much for being such great listeners. And now let's get right to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about everything you do is marketing. Now, whether we want to admit it or not, everything we do during the development to the release of games involves some level of marketing. From communicating and sharing information to making claims that no marketing was done, marketing is an intrinsic component of development and carries well beyond awareness and promotion. In this episode, we're going to uncover some of the general misconceptions people have about marketing, how positioning and representation are just as important as creating awareness, and explore how some strategies can be counterintuitive in both positive and negative ways. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Ryan Sno-wood. Ryan, how's it going, man? Thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know, Ryan is the marketing manager at Epic Story Interactive. He's served as, the marketing and business development manager in different gaming expos and summits too. So he's at Epic Story Interactive now, but he's done so much stuff in various capacities in the industry. But besides that too, he has lots of past experience in different industries with, dude, it's a lot, man. Like business development, sales, customer service, community management, website development, and more. I mean, I would say that, you know how people say a jack of all trades? Well, he's one plus a master of marketing. So
I wouldn't go that
far. But at any rate, Ryan, definitely, honored to have you here on the show with us. But before we get into our conversation I think it's kind of an interesting one, a little bit different, but, a good way to look at things. But before we do that, let's get into the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q Box round is just simply a few random questions I prepared here for Ryan. And Ryan, are you ready?
I don't know. Can anybody really be ready for this?
Sometimes you have people that say they are, and I don't know if they are. And other times you have people that are, boom, let's go. So yes, I guess is the answer.
Let's roll.
All right. What would you say is the most common mistake you see devs or studios make with their games?
Not doing the proper community building and preamble building up to the release of the actual game.
Okay. Now, that said, what is your biggest gaming pet peeve?
Gaming pet peeve is in when you're playing, or?
Yeah, let's do the playing one.
Okay. It would probably be unskippable cutscenes, especially when you repeat the same level and you can't skip it. That's where it gets so evil, because you die and you come back and you got to watch this whole thing all over again.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. That's probably like the one major one that's up there. Okay,
Oh,
just to stay on theme, what is your biggest gaming marketing pet peeve?
making information impossible to find.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just brutal. When companies hide how to contact them on their site,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
studios. I remember I was working with a publisher. We were looking at different games, and they tried to get in touch with the studio, and they couldn't find their. They wanted to look at their game. They wanted to talk to them about their game. Publisher wants to talk to you about your game, and they could not figure out how to get in touch with these people. It was just like that. That's just not okay.
I could see that being very upsetting. Okay. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
I am constantly deviating. I just started playing Uplink again, so that's kind of fun. It's an old hacker game from way back. It's a great little game. It just came on sale on Steam, so I took advantage of it. And between that and Rift Rangers, but of course I'm marketing Rift Rangers, so I spend a lot of time playing it and capturing gameplay and all that. It's also annoyingly addictive, so I kind of forget that I'm supposed to be capturing gameplay sometimes and get a little caught up playing, and then I have to go back and redo it.
Awesome. Well, absolutely love this, and thank you for sharing those things about you. And with that said, let's get right into our conversation today. Again, like I said, definitely a different and interesting one, where we're going to be talking about, everything you do is marketing. So let's kick this off with some clarity, I guess, right? That's important, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But can you explain the concept here of everything you do is marketing in the context of the indie game industry? So, like, how does this differ from how most indie studios may view marketing in general?
I think so. On Reddit, you'll see somebody release a game. They'll say, "I didn't do any marketing at all. Here I got I got this many downloads or this many sales," and then they start talking about it. Yeah, I had this. We have this Discord, and we're talking about our social channels. And we're doing this and we're doing that, and that's all marketing. And they just don't realize it because they weren't sinking ad dollars into it. So in their brain, they look at it as, hey, we're not marketing because we're not sending Facebook a bunch of money each month to run our ads, or Google, or whoever. So what they don't recognize is that every single thing they do, every interaction they have, is all a form of marketing. And if you want to, so this is within the context of indie studios, but if you actually just draw back a little bit and you look at everybody in general, our lives as humans, we walk around. We're constantly evaluating. We're constantly paying attention to every single moment, every single person we encounter, every business we encounter. We're trying to decide whether or not we want to work with them, do whatever. Is it safe? Is it something we feel comfortable with? And if you want any greater proof that we are constantly marketing ourselves, just look at Facebook. Look at the images people provide on there. They're always putting their best foot forward. They're always trying to show off who they are, and sometimes good or bad. So when you look at it from that context, you recognize that we're all doing this all the time. So why wouldn't a business be any different? Why wouldn't a gaming studio be any different? Why wouldn't you recognize that any interaction you have with a player has the potential to go viral? It has the potential to turn off that person or turn them onto your game. It has the potential for them to turn around and say to all their friends, don't go anywhere near this game, or this is amazing. These developers are amazing. So, and you don't always recognize that something can have that kind of an effect on people, because you do a throwaway comment online, or you do something. I was working on a game one time, and we Splattercat came on and said something. He made some kind of throwaway comment about he'd only accept PR emails from anybody in a UWU format. I had to go Google this. I didn't know what UWU was, right? So I thought, Google this, and then I talked to the developer, and between us, we decided, let's go with this. And we came up with this ridiculous, cutesy UWU answer for it. And the game, it was like mechs and everything else, and against monsters. And so we came up with this really cute little reaction. We talked about how we're fighting, or rather cuddling with monsters and all this. Anyway, he thought it was hilarious, and he decided to do a video on it. And he talked about this story. And then afterwards, people were commenting in the Steam comments about how they were buying the game because of this interaction. So we weren't necessarily looking to market in that moment. We were just trying to get Splattercat to play the game, but hadn't realized that that entire series of interactions created an image that players latched onto. And they thought, these guys are awesome. Let's go. They obviously know how to have fun. Let's go with this. So, and it goes back to, you never quite know what interaction is going to go viral. You don't quite know what interaction is going to cause people to sit up and take notice. And it becomes its own marketing vehicle for you. So you always have to just be mindful of that in every single interaction.
You know, I want to call out and say that that is such a really good example of like how something that's not perceived initially as marketing that can easily develop into something like totally unanticipated and such a big a big opportunity, like you said with, you know, Splattercat. Like that's just really cool, because again, like you called out, like at first initially we kind of think of this idea of, hey, we didn't use marketing dollars, or we didn't have a huge budget or no budget, whatever. But yet, in this just one little thing that we were like, that's not, it developed into something really big and like in terms of an opportunity. And the fact that you're saying you guys were getting sales, or there were sales being made, and people are calling out from that initial moment. So it's like, that's definitely marketing, but we don't look at it as marketing because of maybe how nuanced or organic the actual progression of things was. So I just loved how you called out to that, because it is really interesting, and it puts us in a different position in terms of thinking of like, what is marketing?
Exactly.
Cool. Well, let's move on, because there's a lot we want to talk about here. And I know we're kind of limited on time, unfortunately. And folks, if you hear a little bit of difference in Ryan's voice, it's because of you're probably earlier hearing some clicking. We fixed that, and we're moving right along. So that said, let's discuss some marketing conceptions, because I know there's a bunch of out there, and I think that it's important to kind of go into some of these. So what would you say are common ones, right, about, you know, marketing in the indie game industry that you've come across in your experience? Like, what are some of these things that we should probably be aware of? What are these misconceptions?
I think one of the most evil ones is that you have to misrepresent. I really dislike that. And the fact is that marketing should be the ultimate truth. You should never, ever be suggesting something that isn't true. And you'll see it in gameplay videos, especially because I think a lot of developers don't necessarily recognize that when you post a gameplay video that's not the actual gameplay, you've lied. Yeah. And customers really don't like being lied to. It's not a comfortable feeling. Lack of communication, that's a really big one. If things are going on, you need to let them know what's happening or why, in so much as you can. And when I say about telling the truth, I don't mean being blunt or whatever else. You still have to use finesse. You still have to be diplomatic. You just have to make sure that you're never misrepresenting yourself. You're not telling an outright lie. And sometimes you can't tell the whole truth.
Yes.
That's okay. That's perfectly fine. You don't tell the whole truth about your own life. And it goes back to, we as humans, we market generally. Like, you don't go on a first date wearing your worst clothes. It's just, we all do this. So, and it goes to, you don't share all of your personal information either. And same with your company. You're not going to share all those details. Those are two of the bigger ones that I see. And then anything past that is this conception that marketing costs an exponential amount of money. And that actually, I think one of the biggest ones, so it costs a lot of money. That's one of the biggest ones I'm often amazed at, because it doesn't. It can, don't get me wrong. It can be as infinite a black hole as you want to make it, without question. But the other major one, though, is that the idea that you don't have to market, it just kind of blows my mind. I see that a lot with indies. They have this really crazy misconception about not having to actually market. And there was one other one that was occurring to me, and I actually forget what it was right now, but it'll come back to me in a minute.
Yeah, no, those are just some good ones. And one I'll call it too is like, transparency is important, but TMI or too much information is unnecessary, right? And then, like, I think of some other cool ways to kind of explore a little bit in different perspectives is, let's say, we think of the development process in itself as not marketing, but how you represent and communicate information to your team or even others publicly is, in a way, right? Like how you're positioned, how you represent, because you could say, hey, we're all about this cute, cuddly game, but we're very that jives with this particular audience, but yet we're anti something else or whatever. I mean, not to get into really specific things, but like having some contrast there could also be weird in a form of marketing or representing who you are. And that's what marketing is in a way too, is some form of representation. And again, like just so many different variables and examples, and especially to the ones that you provided, and how, like, there are lots of misconceptions. Like, you need a lot of money to market. It's like, no, it's all about how you communicate that information. So good ones there. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So for example, like, when you're starting a new project, whether it's a concept or prototype, how would you say that this process relates to marketing more than devs, studios may initially think? How do you think development or concepts or whatever can relate to marketing?
The process, well, people are fascinated by the process itself, because making games is a little bit of a mystery to most people. Everybody has these ideas about what it is. And if you ever want to see where some of the most fun ideas, like that people have about it, you go on any Facebook group or whatever else that's devoted to games, and you watch somebody post that, hey, I've got this great idea for a game, I just need a developer and we'll split it all 50-50, not recognizing what's actually involved in the development of a game. Like, the idea is just such a small part of the whole thing. And but like I said, people just have this idea, maybe from movies, I don't know what, from what, that's like some kind of drag and drop interface, and that's that. Off you go with the game, you're good a week later. And it's actually really fascinating to watch it happen, and all of the different iterations, the finding the bugs, and there's points when you're at the early stages when you're looking at this going, like, how anybody sees a game here, I'm completely amazed, because it doesn't look like anything. But then you start playing around with it and it's like, oh, well, this is weirdly fun. I don't really know what's happening here, but okay. And it just, so being able to show that off and bring the viewer, bring the players along for the ride, and really give them a chance to kind of see inside, see the secret recipe, is a lot of fun. And it's a huge opportunity that a lot of studios kind of miss out on. There are some really famous examples of this where games were made kind of in tandem with the community, and of course Minecraft being a really famous one, where Notch was actually continually communicating and implementing ideas as it's going along, iterating on everything. What else had you asked here? There was,
I mean, I like, in terms of like what that communicate, like I was going to add to that as well as the communication aspect, or I'm sorry, not just the communication, but like how you communicate and who your audience is, because you initially said like, focus on ideas, right? Or the idea concept. But then from there, it's like, okay, ideas are kind of a dime a dozen, but like of this idea, who is it? Who are we communicating this idea to? And how much of maybe the audience that we know about? And instead of thinking about the idea, it's also, we got to start somewhere, right? But then from there, it's like, okay, now who is this really for? And then how are we appropriately like kind of narrowing this down to better understanding like what that is? And I would say that too. And I think what you were leading up to or alluding to is just simply, knowing who the idea or the game is for, or where that idea will fit into a commercial space, into the market, is really kind of a type of marketing. Maybe it's not the forwardness of being creating awareness, but it's the initial part, because before you create awareness, you got to know who are the people you're trying to make aware of the project and such.
Finding that initial audience is key. Identifying them and communicating with them and bringing them along for the ride, and they become your advocates. They become your champions, essentially.
Yeah.
And those and they feel that way because they feel like they were a part of this, that they had a say in it all. And it's unbelievably important. I don't understand when I see studios ignore players' opinions in that sense. Don't get me wrong. There's absolutely opinions are a dime a dozen, and you will see some really funny ones pop up where they'll say, oh, well, this should be this. And they explain this entire massive idea. And of course, as a developer, I've seen developers actually say, that sounds like an amazing game. You should go make that, because that is not what this is at all. So identifying that audience and communicating with them, and then bringing and sticking with them. But within that, it helps you hone your messaging, so you're not trying to be everything to everybody, because the guaranteed way to fail is to try and please everyone. And it's simply not going to happen.
Right.
So you stick with the people. You stick with where there's that overlap between what they want and what you want, and you just continue on that way.
Yeah. And and what you just outlined too is narrowing down that messaging is also in a way like kind of maybe refining the scope or really narrowing down the core elements of the game that are necessary to be there. So, they do work in tandem in a way, like even though indirectly it might not come off as or be viewed as marketing, you still have to be aware of those things, because eventually it's going to come to a head where, hey, it is now marketing. This messaging is part of it, even in the early development, and having kind of that vision and kind of that plan and route and those learnings are going to help kind of shape that overall vision. Yeah, exactly. Great examples that you provided. Now, with that said, I'm curious too, because I want to go back to something you called out before, where like, opening up, you said like, hey, no marketing. We didn't do any marketing, right? So, right. And you had a great example, but I want to explore this a little bit further. So like, how does, that particular scenario, we did no marketing, doesn't really appropriately represent the truth? What are some other, I guess, examples of like how this doesn't make sense or doesn't compute? Like, I know it doesn't for me. When I hear people say, we didn't do marketing, and look,
it's this concept, and there's this romantic ideal, and I think one of the greater examples of that has always been Stardew Valley, because that's a really famous story. Eric Barone there, where he had created this game and all by himself, did everything with it. And it was featured in a really fantastic book, Press Start. And they delved into the entire story, recognizing that everything about this was a very unique, one-off kind of situation. And it's always argued, oh, well, he didn't do any marketing, and look how amazing it turned out. but he was doing marketing. He wasn't outwardly saying, yes, I'm going to sit down today and market this game and I'm going to do advertisements and all this. What he was doing was communicating with the community. He had this entire series of communications on Reddit and getting people's input and working with the community. And all of those interactions were part of his marketing efforts, whether he recognized them as marketing efforts or not. And he did an extraordinary job, like just truly extraordinary job. And absolutely, hat off to him. Remarkable. But it can never, it really shouldn't be viewed as, hey, this is the shining example that we're going to use. And we're all going to aspire to attain this. It's like, no, there are other things you could do and some really simple marketing techniques that you can implement. And just in the most simplest of which is just simply having a cohesive message, having everything line up so that you're not all over the map with different icons or different imagery or mishmash of things. Just having your messaging line up and having that personality of who you are kind of come through in your communications. And a lot of studios do that without actually recognizing that that's what they're doing. And they didn't look at it as marketing because nobody came up to them and said, hey, listen, every time you communicate with the world in any way, shape, or form, whether you're posting on Facebook, you're posting on LinkedIn, you're posting on Reddit, you're just simply interacting with somebody on a throwaway on somebody else's Twitter, you are in fact marketing yourself and showing the world who you are. And the minute you say something that's questionable, that is going to garner some backlash, especially when you get into political things, don't recommend it. Unless it's something you're on the right side of history and you firmly agree with. Even then, they just try to keep it focused.
Yeah. Another thing I want to call too that I think is funny, another example, because I think the Stardew Valley one is a good one, but also like Fallout guys, because I remember there's this like kind of like infamous tweet, I forgot who of the team, but they're like, yeah, we basically did no marketing. But what's really interesting though, is like, again, I think it's part of that perception that we kind of opened with, because if there's several articles that ask them about like their whole, basically the influencer or creator program that they put together, and how they were very strategic in that approach and how the creators could actually support the project, how they were supporting the creators. I mean, and they simplified it, but it's still, it was a very strategic approach, and kind of one of the main contributing factors that, Fall Guys became to what we know it as today, and how it grew and everything. And that wasn't accidental. That didn't just happen. Like, they planned how they would support and build this creator community. And it worked very well. So I can't call that no marketing though.
No, and you just hit the nail, a really good nail on the head, not the nail, is working with content creators and getting out there and just communicating with them and getting them your game, and making sure that people have what they need from you to continue their own creative juices going, continue their own creative train. And Fall Guys, like, their marketing, their social media strategy was amazing, and it was so good, and they put it together, they executed it so well, and they put so much thought and process into it. And I find it absolutely hilarious that they don't recognize that as being marketing. It makes me wonder what they think marketing actually is. And it's and of course you have the Among Us, another absolute blow up game. Victoria Tran, of course, rose to a lot of prominence. She was brilliant as a social media marketer, and she helped make all of that happen as well. But another great example of just using social media to its best advantage and involving creators, content creators, streamers, and just bringing them all in, because it's all part of the community. And again, I go back to, It's all, every time you open your mouth, you are marketing.
Yeah.
You're representing yourself. You're representing your brand. And the minute you say something wrong, you will know.
Yeah. And
it becomes a very immediate counter marketing or whatever
it might get screen grabbed from Twitter or X or wherever. But anyways.
And we've seen it.
Yeah.
You've absolutely seen it. And the thing is anything you say can and will be used against you in social media. It's just...
So, this brings up some good points in some areas I want to cover a little bit too, because basically you're saying like, hey, these are all forms of communications, right? And some of these communications do set some expectations. So with that said, I know that like sometimes, well, we know this and it's not just studios or developers, it's a lot of businesses, but like sometimes, we can create a lot of friction for players and potential partners without realizing it. You called out to one example, like, hey, I can't find information. I'm a publisher. I want to contact you, and there's no way to contact you, right? Like, so with that said, how would you consider that this as, this friction, this level of friction as counter marketing, right? And why is it important to reduce friction essentially as much as possible? So let's explore as a couple examples of what can create friction, and then why is it important to, I think it will slowly reveal why it's important, but what are some examples of friction?
So I'm actually going to step back for a split second. So something you said at the beginning about all of my different experience. Yes, I had a lot of different experience. When I'm playing a game, I'll do all the side quests before I actually finish the main game. And I'm pretty sure I've applied that same philosophy to life. So, because I've done a lot of side quests. But the thing is that you gain a lot of important XP in the process. And so some of the things that I've learned and it helped hone my understanding of things was in sales. One of the key things I learned in sales was friction. Every time you introduce, essentially what it is, it boils down to is customers have a list, whether they're aware of it or not. They're creating a list, and they have their list of different companies that they're looking at, products, whatever else. And they're not looking to hone. They're not looking for the right product. They're looking to cross products off the list so they can get to the final product.
Make that decision.
You got it. Every single piece of friction you introduce causes them more likely to cross you off that list. So you're going to get tossed. So reducing the friction, every opportunity you have to reduce friction means that they are less likely to cross you off that list. So it can't really be described. People want to simplify their life. They're not out there looking for something to make their life more complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd really like to get this game, but I'd really like to make sure that it is almost impossible to get the details I need on it. I'd much prefer that over just a game where they provide all the information straight up, honest, and give me the exact details I need. I really prefer they hide all that, so I got to go search for it. Nobody says this.
Right. And here's another interesting fact. I'm sorry I can't source it, remember where I got this from, folks, but basically it was either from a podcast or a book I read, but it's kind of the science behind it and how our brains work as humans. It said that we can only approximately process about like 200 decisions a day. Right. And then our mental bandwidth just goes away. It's done. So think about that. If you're creating a process, a funnel or whatever, and you're trying to have people do some type of action and whatever that process is, if they're required to make lots of decisions, that's wearing down their mental bandwidth. And let's face it, whatever we're trying to create awareness around these things too, it's probably more impulsive or not a priority for people. It's that's what we're competing with. We're competing with day-to-day life decisions that either matter or not to this individual's life. And we're usually should be at the bottom of the list unless it's an impulse thing, right? But so you have a lot against you from the get-go. But now if you're creating more steps, more friction for people to make these decisions that they're trying to narrow down, as Ryan was saying, well, then you're just going against yourself. And I think this plays right into that whole concept of counter marketing. You're marketing, you're creating awareness, you're making all these posts and tweets and everything else. You're getting all this stuff out there, but then with everything that you have that creates friction, you're basically wasting, whether you have marketing dollars or not, but you're wasting time at the end of the day. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective too, knowing like, hey, if people are limited on their mental bandwidth and what types of decisions they can make in a day, you don't want to create friction because it's going to hurt your numbers. It's going to hurt the bottom line that you're looking for.
Well, ultimately, they will make a decision. It's just not the decision you want them to make.
Yeah.
At the very least, they'll backburner you.
Yeah.
Like, I'll get to that.
Yep.
Because it's not something I can immediately solve. It's not a low-hanging fruit. It's not something that's really simplistic to get into. So and that's where impulse buys come from. You're walking through a store, there's something right there. It's like, oh yeah, you know what? I was thinking about that recently, and it's right there in a bin on your way to the cash register, and you pick it up.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. That is the ultimate no friction impulse buy right there. And it's got like a nice big low number sitting on there. So they're trying to get you to buy this as an impulse buy, and it works. It absolutely works. We've seen the proof of this one in the very fact that stores continue to do it.
Yep, exactly.
So why are we not so when we put our games out there, why would we ever want to introduce any level of friction whatsoever between a customer's initial encounter with your video game and all of the subsequent encounters that they have? So they just saw it in passing. They saw your tweet go by. They saw whatever, and it caught their attention or planted itself in their subconscious, and they see it again later on. Any kind of friction that you introduce to them, making from the point of noticing to the point of purchasing, every bit of friction has, I would argue, an exponential effect on the likelihood or the lack of likelihood of them actually making that purchase.
Yeah.
Because why would I bother to complicate my life?
Exactly. Our lives are complicated enough as it is, right? So great choice. And let's say real quick, let's try to convert some of these things that we're talking about into actual things relating to what we do as creating awareness marketing. Like it could be just simply not having a clear short description and identifying your hooks, right? Like if those aren't done clearly and people read your description or see screenshots and can't clearly identify your game, boom, that's friction. Making things hard for people to do. And it doesn't just apply to players. It also applies as like, hey, if you're sending out to influencers and you have a big long email, deleted. They're not going to bother with it, right? Their time is.
Or alternatively, you send out this email with no links whatsoever
or
to
that.
any of your. So anybody who's listening to this, any studios that are listening to this, for the love of God, if you're going to send a message to a streamer or anybody, put yourself in their position. What information do they need to have in order for them to make a decision? And this actually goes back to this. We can actually circle this entire thing right back to this really quickly. What information do they need to have to make a decision? A clear and concise description of the game so they actually understand what they're getting into. With streamers, if you want to get into some kind of comparative, go ahead. With publishers and streamers, you can get away with that. Try not to do it with the public. The public, it's like Mario meets this. Like you're setting up some weird expectations here that maybe you shouldn't be doing. But if you need a shorthand, sometimes people in the industry, we all do speak in a kind of shorthand because we're very familiar with all these games. So have that clear description, have that clear call to action, what you want them to have happen, what you feel what is that they can do, and that how it's going to benefit them. They're not looking to say, listen, this would really benefit me if you did this. They don't care. Yep. But if you introduce this and say, yeah, this is great for your audience, and this is exactly the sort of game you really like to play. I've seen you've had a lot of fun with this one in the past. If you're introducing this in such a way that, hey, this is actually something good for them, and you're being truthful,
right?
You're genuine, honest, and truthful, then it's going to fly. and then you provide them with all the information they need to see. So if you have a media kit or a press kit, link it. If you don't have a media kit or press kit, create it and then link it. So just don't email them if you don't have that.
Yeah.
When your Steam page link, your game link, whatever it is else that you want to add in, if you have any kind of reviews that you want to include a link to, include those so that they know what they're dealing with, and all of your freaking contact details.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, if they need to get in touch with you, don't make it hard on them. They should just be able to click of a button, contact you on the forum that makes most sense to them. If they prefer Twitter, they should be able to get a hold of you on Twitter. If they prefer Facebook, I highly doubt it. They should be able to find that email. Within reason, people, including your WhatsApp, is highly unlikely to help you in any way, shape, or form.
So at the end of the day, folks, whoever it is, whoever this audience is, whether it's your players or influencers or anybody else for that matter, make it simple, make it easy for them to take the action you want them to take, and where you can, add value, because that can go a long way too. Now, I know
show them the value that means something to them.
Yeah, exactly. So I know we're coming close to time, but I want to ask one more question before we close here, and that is, hey, we know that there's lots of strategies and tactics out there that we could be doing, and honestly, I see this all the time, and I'm sure people feel this way, is it can be really overwhelming at times. Oh, I should be doing this or this, and a lot of conflicting internal thoughts. But why is it also important to understand that sometimes doing less marketing can actually be doing more? What are some of your thoughts about that potential process? Because again, if we're doing a little bit of everything, are we really being effective?
Yeah, and that's a trap we all fall into. That's so easy to fall into, and I've fallen into it myself, where you try too hard to be all of the things rather than focusing in on what's going to work. Having one channel rather than trying to do all of the channels. And if you don't have the bandwidth to do that, just stick to what you can do. There's a lot of different ones out there that are platforms that are available for you to waste your attention on. So just honing that in and focusing on the channels that work for you, that are easy to manage, and focus your intent on the message that you want to get through. So that and ideally making that messaging make sure that messaging resonates with your core audience, because if you're constantly seeing that there's no engagement on your posts or whatever else, and I'm guilty of this as well, where I don't necessarily recognize I'm doing the posts and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not getting any interaction here. I need to change things up.
Yeah.
And you gotta, so trying to do, and then the other side of it is how you post, right? So, and I've seen this before where people post sales. So like if you look at it like a kind of like an 80-20 or like a split, you want to keep your salesy buy my product down to a bare minimum.
Yeah.
People don't want to be hammered by that. So in the sense that doing less marketing is doing more, recognizing that each of your antics, each of way that you communicate publicly is a form of marketing. Okay, that's fine. So stick with entertaining, having fun with your audience and informing your audience and just letting them know that, hey, I'm here, we're in this together, we're having a lot of fun, and we're making games. Like this is the epitome of fun here. And when it comes time, hey, by the way, can you buy my game? Right. So, and therein lies that more hardcore marketing aspect. And that's where if you want to spend your ad dollars there and things like that, because you are legitimately asking for a sale. So it's fine. You can get to that point. But recognizing that during those other points, you want to adjust. You don't want to be all buy all the time.
Right. And it's not always just buy, folks, too. It's the same exact thing. Basically, it comes down to that action, right? So even if you're saying, hey, wish list my game, that's basically the same thing. And why, really establishing that relationship essentially with that audience, with your community. So you get to the point like, by the way, hey, do you mind? Because it's like, think of it this way in practical terms. Like, well, the classic one is, do you ask someone to marry you on your first date? No, right? I'm just gonna say hard no, okay? Or let's say this: you move to you move to a new neighborhood. Do you immediately go ask that neighbor, "Hey, can I borrow your car?" Like, they don't know you, right? Would you, or just even a stranger, can I borrow your car? Right? It doesn't. Those things don't work that way. And the same thing is kind of similar. Different, but similar concept when it's like, hey, buy my game. Hey, wish list or whatever. And again, what helps is if you have all these other things that align well and don't create friction and stuff, it makes that process a little bit easier. But generally, it's just being mindful of that. Like put yourself in their shoes too. How do you like being marketed? How do you not like being marketed? Those are all great examples or processes that you can kind of see yourself through to see like, hey, is what I'm doing align with what I would like to have done? I mean, it's a very simple concept, but sometimes we get lost in trains of thoughts and too much in the weeds to the point where it ends up being counterintuitive. It's not as helpful in what we're doing. And then, all sorts of problems can happen. Like, hey, I'm doing all this stuff and nothing's happening. Why? And that could be part of it. So, all right, we talked a lot here. But as we close, love some either tips or suggestions that you have based on our conversation today. So what are some that you have for us, Ryan?
There was one. Remember I said that earlier on, you had asked me a question. I said, and there was one other thought that I had misconceptions, and I knew I'd remember eventually. And it actually comes down to this, and it actually fits in here quite nicely, is that marketing isn't a magic bullet.
Yep.
Like it's amazing how often you see that. It's like they're just like, oh, we'll just put all the money into marketing and that will just make people buy our games. No, that's not how it works. That's not at all how it works. And back to what you were just talking about moving in and borrowing somebody's car, is a level of trust you have to develop before you can ask somebody a large ask. And asking somebody to buy your game is a bit of a large ask. So develop the trust first. So, and that comes down to your communications, and it delves into what I'm next going to say is that ensuring I've said all three of these things already, but I'm going to go back to them. Always ensure your people can get in touch with you however they prefer. And again, within reason, you don't need to worry about WhatsApp or whatever else, but just make sure the major social platforms are covered, in that if somebody finds you on Facebook, that they prefer Twitter and they can find you on Twitter, or TikTok, they can find you on TikTok. Whatever works, you just make it easy on them. And for God's sakes, have a website and put all of this on there. They should be able to quickly and effectively find this, as well as your press kit, any kind of relevant contact info whatsoever. And every single interaction has that possibility to go viral. You just never really know what the heck is going to happen. So and further to that, once you recognize that, have that guide your actions. Make sure that if this interaction goes viral, people aren't going to look at me as a total jerk, or that I didn't lie. Yeah. So marketing is not about, again, it goes back to something I said earlier, was that people have this misperception that marketing is about convincing somebody to buy your thing however you want, however you can convince them. And that's not it at all. It's about showing who you are and what you are offering in the most truthful way, and giving them the opportunity to make that decision as to whether or not they want to buy into what you have to sell. So, and again, be diplomatic, be truthful, be kind, and recognizing that if you miscommunicate, it can end badly, and like lying though will end really badly. And the internet does not forget. If you're ever wondering if the internet forgets, just Google "tell me about ramparts." I want to tell you about ramparts, and you'll just see how badly things can go and how much the internet will remember.
Yeah, no, great points. And I would say good summary of everything we discussed today, because again, folks, everything you do, we do is marketing. So just, again, love those points. Thanks so much, Ryan. And before we close, what are ways people can learn more about your studio, the games you guys worked on, or reach out to you? Give us some links.
We can post them in here, I'm sure, but Epic Story Interactive is the name, is our website, and we're a really awesome studio, if I do say so myself. We make some really cool games and annoyingly addictive games, as I've discovered through every single gameplay. If you want to follow, if you can email me, my name at gmail.com. It's very easy to find, or Ryan Sno-wood at epicstoryinteractive.com, whichever you prefer. And social media, while I am on all of them all of the time, whether I like it or not, I am very, very easy to find on LinkedIn. Ryan Sno-wood. I'm kind of like Tigger. I am the only one. And and Twitter, same thing. Ryan Sno-wood. Again, very easy to find. And I will, so add me on LinkedIn. I will add you back. It's just, Jeremy Schiffling once said that, and I kind of applied that same logic ever since. Like, yeah, just, I add everybody. Like, by all means, this is great. I love connecting with people. So please reach out, ask questions. I've had marketers reach out to me before, just young people who are just getting into the industry, and just say, hey, can you look at my work and go over and say, yeah, sure, this is great. And I've made a lot of new friends that way. So it's great.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for having the discussion and keeping such like open and being so transparent and friendly to have a way for people to reach out and to help out too. But again, can't thank you enough for being on the show today. It really means a lot to us. So thanks.
It's been absolutely brilliant, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's always brilliant to chat with you, as always.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.